Welcome to the Kundalini Collective podcast number 9. This is one is slightly radical in the sense I am going to introduce it rather than Samir, but we're both very happy to have Ellie Paskell with us today. Now, Ellie is a current and active and a valued member of the Kundalini Collective. She has also had an interesting journey. She was a professional actress, successful professional actress, and she's now a somatic coach. I actually have first met Ellie 4 years ago on a retreat weekend organised by Emerging Proud. And this was for people who'd been trained to be peer group facilitators. And I was very struck by Ellie, by her almost ethereal presence and her presence of calm and warmth. And so I will find this podcast very interesting to know more about Ellie's story, and I'm sure it will be an interesting journey.
Welcome, Ellie, and thank you very much for being on our podcast. I'm quite curious to know, what was life like before your awakening, and what were you doing, and what was going on?
Yes, good question. Firstly, I'll say hi and thanks for that lovely introduction, guys. So happy to be here. So I first remember feeling Kundalini moving in my body when I was a child, maybe 7 or 8. But it was quite slight, and my soul or my body wasn't ready yet for it to really do its thing. And age 9, I fell in love with acting and started to act professionally from about 13. And then I went to drama school and came out at 21, and very quickly went into various BBC dramas, was working quite constantly, having an amazing time. It really was like, the montage scene in the film where everything comes together. And then when I was 22, I was at a music festival with my friends, and for the first time, I felt this tiredness in my body, and it was completely inexplicable. And very quickly, though, when the tiredness started to come more regularly, I tucked it under my wing with what I now understand as this ancestral trait, psychological trait, which likes to dance through my being, that says, this is something that's wrong with me. It's probably linked to something that I did wrong. So I'm just going to tuck it away. And it makes me want to shake it off, even just saying it. Goodness me. Tuck it away and try and hide it and be better and do better and work harder and make the tiredness go away. And funnily enough, it didn't work. And I had about 5 years of trying that and really trying to tinker with my life as it was, which was, in so many ways beautiful. I was at that point living in London, beautiful partner, beautiful apartment, wonderful, exciting work, great friends, and my body kept shutting down. And while on the one hand, a part of me was thinking, this is completely inexplicable, incongruent with my life. I'm happy, stuff's great. What is this? Like, what is this tiredness? What is this? Get aside, get away. You're not part of me. You're not part of me. But deep down, right from the start, I knew that what I was feeling was guidance. And there was something here tapping in my gut, pumping in my heart, saying, there's something else that you want. There's another way here. Your body isn't broken. She's guiding you, and you need to surrender to this. And finally, after different sort of phases and levels of surrender, I had, psychotherapy. I spent some time in 12-step programs, different kinds of things. I finally realized, literally sort of all in the space of about a week, A, what is happening in my body is not my fault. This tiredness is not my fault. B, I can't control it. I don't know why it's happening. And C, while it's here, I don't particularly want to be alive. Like, that's how horrid it is that this keeps happening, and I don't know what to do about it. And so that's, I'd say, when I really showed up for myself and I said, all right, I've got you. Like, no matter what it takes for us to find a way through this, no matter what I have to change or let go of, I took my own hand and said, we're going to find our way back to vibrancy, to joy, to more of a sense of wholeness. And so for me, that really takes me up to the point where just before the Kundalini really got going. Yeah.
So would you mind talking a bit about your Kundalini Awakening experience, what happened before, what happened after, and how you felt during that process?
Yeah. I think it's important to say that I'm really still in it. And so the point that I was just at a moment ago, that was 2012, a year when so much changed for so many people. And everything just aligned, all kinds of synchronicities, guidance, supports, knowings. And I ended up at a trauma clinic in England, which deals with trauma from an energetic level. And I had no idea that I had trauma. I remember feeling clearly that that was the place for me to go. My body just knew. But when I heard it was a trauma clinic, I felt crushed because I thought, oh, well, I've got no place there. Thankfully, when I spoke to the man who ran it, he was the first person who was able to say to me, this is why what's happening in your body is happening. It's my knowing, my experience that the journey of healing trauma and Kundalini Awakening are often very linked. And when he spoke to me about how he understood what was happening in my body and why she kept shutting down, it was like the first person that I'd seen who was really able to offer me water for my desert. It was like I'd been scratching at the backstage stage curtain of life, and everyone had been saying, no, there's nothing else behind there. There's nothing else behind there. But I knew I've been raised by very radical parents. So I had that part of my psyche already that said, if there is something that I need, if there is something that we need collectively, there is an answer to it. And it doesn't matter if I can't see that yet in society with my own eyes, it will appear or we'll make it. So I knew, like, there's another way, the way's going to open. And then, I met Benjamin Fry, and he, made me realize that I was to go to that clinic. And when I got in there, it was such a safe space. My body just knew, oh, right, like, this is where we can do what we've wanted to do. And I understand now that on one simple level, I can look at it by saying my body had a whole lot of trapped trauma energy, trapped, compressed fight, flight energy in my body, which is what happens when a person becomes traumatized. And I needed to shake it out. I needed to be able to find my way back to where on earth that came from, which initially for me was a puzzle because I believed I had no trauma in my life. And and shake it out. And so unsurprisingly, that's when the Kundalini went, okay, guys, it cracked its knuckles and started moving. And I didn't know at that point that that's what was happening. And indeed, nobody's said the word Kundalini to me until Alan did. Oh, which really touches my heart when I realized that. I just knew. So I basically spent a year in treatment with this clinic. And then I spent a year doing healing and meditative practices in Thailand with various teachers and guides and healers. And after those 2 years, I thought, so much had shifted in my body. I felt like I'd had a total reset. The Kundalini was moving, even though I had no idea what that it was Kundalini. I just knew that everything had changed in terms of how I experienced my body and how I experienced the world. And I think, again, another piece that kept me from really saying, guys, I think there might be something happening here that isn't happening in other people. Can somebody help me with this? Is because of, again, that trait, that ancestral learning, that psychological patterning that said, there's probably just something wrong with me. I don't think I even considered, again, the next step of speaking up and being like, there's really something wild going on here, guys, and I might need some help with it. Like, I remember the first time that, and this for me is a really lovely way to explain one of the gifts that I've received from Kundalini in the process, that basically she's shown me my deep truth. You know, as we often talk about in the collective, in a sense, Kundalini shows us that we're just one of a bigger whole, and there isn't necessarily a distinct self. And at the same time, what I believe is that if there is anything I can call Ellie, the way that I can understand what the truth for this being is, and as long as we are in these human suits, we do need to know that, because we need to have our boundaries and we do need to have our clarity to be happy and grounded and healthy. In order to, if there is anywhere that I can find that truth, I'll find it in my body. The mind can be very easily caught up and confused with societal beliefs, with the ideas or demands of others, but the body gives no F's for any of that. The felt sense only is the voice of our soul. If there is such a thing as a soul, if there is such a thing as me, my body is the voice of that truth. And so what I understand is that somewhere when the fatigue started, and I believe the fatigue was the beginning of the Kundalini, because what it was showing me where the blocks were. The Kundalini was like in there, in the, like being like, look, that I can't move right now. And so it made me ravenous. I would do anything to get rid of this fatigue and block in my body because it was so distressing. And, you know, sent out a silent subconscious prayer, show me what is going on in my body. Why is this fatigue coming? You know, I knew, and I never went to a doctor because I knew that if I did, they would have said, you've got chronic fatigue. Lovely girl, I'm so sorry, you're broken, there's nothing we can do. You know, and this age-old ancestral crone inside of me was still there, even at the early stages for me, when I was still, you know, all about people pleasing without realizing I was, all about under eating to look good, and even who cares if it like means that I'm detaching from my integrity, or, you know, not even realizing I was hurting myself in these ways. I had no idea that I was out of integrity, but when the Kundalini came, she started to show me, this is why this hurts. This is what's happening. Here's the true reality of who you are and what you need and what's right for you. So the energetic and the somatic reality was revealed to me. And the piece that I started this whole thread on was, I remember seeing when I was still in the trauma clinic, one of the first times when the energy had really got moving, and I left the clinic with a friend, and I saw, and when I use the word saw here, it's like a combination of seeing and feeling. I saw the energy in my own energy body leave me, go out through somewhere around my eyes and go into my friend's body. And it was this, like this energetic wind showing me like just how uncentered I was with my codependence, with my thinking about other people all the time. How can I take care of their needs? What does she need from me? You know, no wonder the tiredness was coming. I literally wasn't holding my own life force inside my body. And there's so much more I could say about that, but there I will pause.
Thanks, Ellie. I think it's so interesting the way you talk about, firstly, about fatigue, because I've noticed, knowing just in the conversations through the Kundalini Collective, that it seems, especially among women, that is very common. Have you any thoughts on that? Whether that's true or not, or whether why should it be more common among women? I don't know. It's just a thought, just a peripheral thought, really.
Yeah. As I hear you ask that question, I have the image of a rageful dragon around my belly. And this rage is not about you, Alan, remotely. Of course it isn't. And it's saying, of course it's more in women. And so let me find the words. Yes, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, chronic fatigue is more prevalent among women on earth at this time. Men do get it, but it's more present in women. And let's see what wants to be shared about that in this moment. Yeah. So what I touched upon when I talked about the Kundalini showing me that I'd been out of integrity, and, you know, screw integrity, really. I was out of integrity with true joy. I was out of integrity with true health and truly with my life force. And the fact that she was showing me that by saying, look, this is what is happening with your energy body when you do X, Y, and Z. So where, you know, I'd been raised, no, it's not about how I was raised. As a child, I was very, you know, I was quite tomboyish. I was quite probably a little bit eccentric, a little bit of definitely a rainbow child, a little bit outside the box, probably a bit of a rebel, quite a lot of visionary energy. And then I learned around the age of 9 or 10 that if I was going to fall in line with society and be accepted as a female, there were certain things that I needed to do. And it was a very clear choice that I made. You know, not all women make this choice in the way I do. I'm not blaming society for this. As such, I'm not blaming myself or anyone else. It's a choice that I made, and that was the point when I started to, and I've got a lot of like fizziness happening through my body as I say this. Book up, fall in line, suck in my belly, you know, wear clothes that would be attractive, at times, you know, be meek and quiet in a way that would be acceptable, in times learn how to pout or preen or pose or be sexy, and all of this was about experiencing myself from the outside in instead of the inside out. So that disconnection, and I'm not saying that it doesn't happen for men or for those who identify as non-binary. I'm really not saying that, but I just think that for the past certainly several decades, if not centuries, very likely over the past 1500 years when the patriarchy's really been here, it has been even more prevalent in women to push down our own needs, not really know what we think or need or know, and utterly lose ourselves. And I think that's what had happened to me without even realizing it. I'd learned to get this kind of secondary gratification, whereas if I could see that the faces around me were smiling, I'd get that kind of dopamine hit from it, which would be its substitute for the true zest, like the true life force, the true joy and zhuzh that I thank God I've gotten back in touch with now. And that was what I was really thirsty with when I started to feel my body shutting down, like that unconditional joy. I gave it away. And you know, whereas I'd been conditioned or chosen to believe it doesn't matter, like, if I'm disconnected from my body, it doesn't matter if I'm disconnected from my truth, it doesn't matter if I put everybody else's needs before my own. Society teaches me that that's what a good woman is, that's what a successful woman is, that's what an attractive woman is, so I will be happy. And then my body and the Kundalini showed up and said, actually, sweetheart, if you want true happiness, there's a whole other way that you need to go.
Thanks, Salimi. That's I think that makes a lot of sense. A really good answer to maybe not a very good question, but I think it's actually that's an important answer actually, and it makes a lot of sense. And societal conditioning has got a lot to answer for all around. I have another thought that came up, and it's around trauma. I'm not necessarily asking you to talk about the trauma that you refer to, but it's just a thought. was it, is it, what are your thoughts about trauma in this life, or thoughts on possible ancestral trauma or past life trauma? Have you got any thoughts on those?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Alan. Thank you. Yeah, so the first thing that comes up when I hear you ask it is actually that my woo-woo monkey really wants to say something. And what I mean by that is the part of me that I that is still here, that when she or he or they, sorry monkey, I don't know what gender you are, hears me talking about past lives and energy body and all of this stuff, which has become so utterly real to me these past 11 years, but it still remembers how I would have thought of them before. So it's very aware of how some skeptics might receive this, and I often think that it's really great to presence that. Why not? Just to drop in the fact that you don't, please only take what I say if it resonates for your truth. And also maybe it helps you to hear that before any of this happens for me, I was a diehard atheist. I didn't believe in anything supernatural or other than what I could see with my eyes. And then all of this awakened, and I think that's something that a lot of people in particularly the Kundalini journey have to deal with. Like, how can I need to heal my root chakra? I don't believe in a root chakra, but now I can feel my root chakra. Similarly with past lives, for me, I didn't believe in them until suddenly it was just so obvious to me that the essence of what I am is energy, and that can't go away. And with the ancestral and the past life trauma thing, yeah, one time when I was working with an energy healer in Thailand, I had an experience where let me find the right words. I've spent thousands of hours meditating on the insides of my own body, and that really started with my work with him. I would meditate and he would work with my energy body, and I saw this kind of energy current or texture move through my body, and I could see that it was inside of my own body, and it was very clearly telling a story of something that had happened to bring that energy into my body. And at the same time, I knew that hadn't happened in this lifetime. So that was a moment for me. Oh my goodness, right, okay, past life trauma is really a thing. I'd known that before on another level, because I remember being early on in somatic therapy sessions and saying to my therapist, this energy, this isn't mine. This isn't mine. And just knowing, from the body, and the body knows. And then the second piece I'll touch on quickly is, I remember there came a point about 4 years ago when something really shifted in my own dedication to perfecting my own appearance. The bit of me that's like, I am so sick of draining my energy by, again, thinking of myself from the outside in before I consider stepping out the house. I can't do it. I just know. And so I started to go out less put together. And one of the first times I did that, I was in the centre of Manchester, and I felt this kind of energy wind of panic move through me. And I had all of these images of basically men with staffs and torches. And I won't open this portal very wide now because it's a whole topic all on its own. But that's where, for me, my work with healing the trauma from the witch burnings really started, because I realized that this was absolutely present in my body. And so if I was going to heal that, and we know now that epigenetic trauma, and I shy away from saying these words because I think we can know things without science proving them, but has been scientifically proven to be a thing, that our cells are affected. The way the experiences of our ancestors affected their cells, and then that is passed on to us. Cells or DNA? Epigenetic, genetics affected their genetics. All right, something in their body. And then that gets passed on to us. So we're literally carrying. So, if we learn in the times of the witch burnings that another woman, or say a particularly pretty other woman, can't be trusted, she's some kind of a threat, then our ancestor from them holds that as a memory. Everything that happens in the mind happens in the body, and vice versa. It stays trapped in the DNA of the cells, the genetics, whatever we're talking about here. And then that gets passed on, and the women down the line might not know why they find particularly attractive women to be threatening, but they do. And it just becomes, well, she's up herself, or we make other stories about it, she this or that. So yeah, it's a thing. It's really a thing. And I think, as ever, with what this journey with my body and the Kundalini has taught me, it's self-validation of experience in the body. You know, society's taught us to do the opposite. If something's happening in my body, which means I can't really uphold the status quo, particularly if something's happening in my body that makes me irritating to other people, or maybe I can't show up for my 9 to 5, or I won't nod and bow and do it the way everybody else is doing it, then there's probably just something stupid or wrong happening in the body. You're broken, or you're making it up. And so this piece of validating what it is that we feel in our bodies is really important.
Can you talk about your own opinions about the link between trauma, Kundalini awakening, and spontaneous movement?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. So trauma and Kundalini awakening, I believe, and from my own lived experience, in many ways is the same. Not trauma, but healing from trauma and the Kundalini awakening process. So what I mean by that is, to be traumatized means that we've got old energy caught in the body. It's energy which, when we were in a threatening situation in which we ideally wanted to protect ourselves by fighting somebody or yelling at them or running away, for some reason we felt like we couldn't do that, and so the energy went into freeze and got put in our body somewhere. And I read somewhere that the body knows exactly the right place to put the trauma, depending on what kind of trauma it is. Like, it knows which bit of the body can hold it best until it's time to release it. So what we see with that description is that to be traumatized literally means to have these blocks in our bodies. We have these blocks in our energy bodies, and that can mean that we feel numb. It can mean that we feel dissociated. It might mean that we have a lot of fatigue. It might mean that we have a lot of anxiety, because what the body does when there are these blocks in the system, bless it, is always trying to get it out. Like, the body is always orientating to health. We can always trust what the body wants to do. You know, the next step in expansion, it's always guiding us to. And if the body's got a lot of this big trauma energy trapped inside, actually the next way to feel better, which in our society we've basically slammed down on, is to feel the anxiety, is to feel the stress, is to let it move through the body. And through feeling it, or crying, or feeling angry, whatever the anxiety might bring, it might make us want to run, it might make us need to throw up, whatever it is, the body is literally discharging this energy. It's literally getting it out, you know. And you can see that if you type in polar bear coming out of freeze into YouTube, and we see the polar bear that was sedated comes out and it shakes, right? Because that's what mammals do to get the energy out. And so here's the link to the Kundalini awakening. Obviously, it's said that's what's happening when the Kundalini awakens and moves through the body, is that it is clearing out these blocks in the energy channels. And so for many people, this looks like shaking. And for many, this really is the same thing. The body is just doing what it knows how to do. It's discharging. It might be ancestral trauma. It might be stuff from this lifetime that we remember or that we don't remember. It might come out with heat. It might come out with quivering. Can come out in all kinds of ways, you know, big emotional outbursts, but it's essentially the same thing. And so you, Samir, there talked about spontaneous movement. And even though I have yeah, more that I can say about that. I'm really curious, Samir, whether for you, when you think of spontaneous movement, that's something that really feels rooted in something that you've experienced, or whether you're more drawing on what other people in the collective have spoken about. Like, what's here for you with that?
So when I first had a Kundalini awakening, the manifestation immediately was spontaneous movement. It was spontaneous mudras, moving a bit like an Indian dance, and spontaneous yoga that really helped a sciatica problem that I had. So if you had fatigue issues, I had back issues, and the spontaneous movement was really helping my back that was in severe pain. And there was like Chinese qigong movements as well. So there's this weird mixture. And even to today, I'm constantly doing mudras and I'm constantly moving my hands and parts of my body. But the reason I asked you that question was because, and maybe this is because Alan told me once when he met you that you were doing some spontaneous movements yourself. And I think he linked your experience to my experience because he said someone else has what you have. So I'm kind of throwing back the question to you.
Yeah. That's so interesting because there's been all kinds of movement and spontaneous things happening in my body in this journey, but I don't remember that, Alan. So that was when we were at the retreat.
Yeah, it was.
Was it my fingers? Was it the whole of me?
It was a lot of this, a lot of hands. And I remember you saying that you did comment at the time how, because obviously everyone there had gone through a form of spiritual awakening, not necessarily Kundalini, obviously, but you said at the time it was great because in that environment you didn't have to contain it. You could just be yourself.
Right.
I remember you saying that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that that information. Yeah, so I have had spontaneous movements. Like I've had times when actually the ones that really come to mind is when I've been walking somewhere and I felt like it's always when I've been in nature and I felt like something else but is propelling me. It's only happened 2 or 3 times and it's amazing every time it does. It's like usually around my hips, like I'm not doing the walking. It's magical. I think I've also had spontaneous movements with my fingers. And I particularly have I just know that certain positions I find myself doing them without thinking because they feel so good, like when I do this. And I think this is why this is the ring finger, because there's so much power that flows down these fingers and it connects us to a lot of guidance and knowing and the external energy of all that is. That's why this was the finger that got the ring on it. Like it was like an owning of that. But we won't go into that really now. But I think the main thing that comes to me when I hear you speak, Helen, is I felt like there's been this version of me that just got adjusted and broken in and had her spirit broken and tamed, when I was tiny, when we go to school and we learn to sit still, and the amount of health and joy and sovereignty and empowerment and life force that went away with that. For me, and this is often what I'm holding space for with my clients, giving my body the permission to move as she needs to move, to make the noises she needs to make. Like, I think that's why such a big and early part of my journey was going to the trauma clinic, where the knowing was, we basically have to take the bulldog clips off the body here. We have to tell it, look, you're in a safe space. Nobody's going to judge you. You can do all of that, frankly, quite considered animalistic stuff that society would be freaked out about, would look down on. And it's been, that kind of wild, powerful, doesn't give an F about what anybody else thinks, part of me that's had to come through, and she's still coming through, has been so, I've needed viscerally so much to make space for her, because I'm in so much pain if I don't. Like, basically, I mean, it gets easier, it's gotten easier, you know, my body is consistently healing in amazing ways. And I still need to give myself decent chunks of the day where like my body can do what it needs to do, whether I'm in nature, whether I'm, you know, at home in a safe space. I think this is part of the reason that I'm traveling the country at the moment, not just going to the sacred sites, but quite often I'm on my own doing these travels, because there's still so much that I had to give space for my body to do, you know, and it doesn't look civilized, and it's amazing. And I feel like, no, I don't feel like, I know that this is the shaking and the movements and the expression of need and radical truth that is coming through me that my ancestors couldn't do, you know.
Could I want to just hold that thought for a minute, because your work is somatic work and it's body work, and you talk about your body and how it feels. And I'm just going to link it to my own experience. I used to DJ. I think you know this, and I know you like 5 rhythms. And looking back at my time DJing and my love of clubbing and dancing, I realized that I was unconsciously following some shamanic path where music, rhythm, and dance, shaking, and really feeling my body was, unbeknownst to me, quite helpful and helping me understand some of my emotional space. So after my Kundalini Awakening, strangely, it dragged me where, like, it ripped me from the DJ world, like, this is not good for you anymore. And but still, I can dance and I can go out and enjoy myself. But it made me look at the whole history of dancing, going back to shamanic dancing. And I went to Cuba, I went to Jamaica, I went to Brazil, where they have a spiritual practice where they have a rhythm, and then a spirit comes into them, and each rhythm induces a different spirit, and the spirit can bring some kind of healing or communion with nature. So going back to the kind of somatic work, it seems that indigenous culture has a way of putting people into a trance-like state or bringing them into their body for some kind of individual and collective healing. And it also seems now in the modern world that people like yourself coming back to that and looking at it maybe from a different perspective, but realizing the body might hold a lot of solutions for our health and our healing. Mm-hmm. So I'm coming to it from one way, but you seem to have an interesting journey to your somatic world, and that's where you seem to be bringing a lot of healing. So what are your thoughts about this, the body and health, and how it links to your spiritual awakening journey and Kundalini? What have you learned about that?
Oh, yeah, thanks for that question, Samir. Yeah, I have this really beautiful, powerful image of indigenous peoples with the drum, with the fire, with the movements. You know, that question when anybody's ill in the village, the shaman asks them, when did you stop dancing? You know? And I think it's interesting that at this point in history, we ask that question, you know, like, why the body? Why? What does the body have to give us? And I utterly understand why, because we have been disconnected from it for so long. And it's my according to my experience, it is the key. Like, this is the map, this is the compass. We know this when we're tiny children. We come in and we know, oh, I'm a follow what feels good. I'm a go towards what feels right for me. I'm a basically have my boundaries. I won't put things in my mouth that don't taste good. I won't wear clothes that don't feel right. I'm not going to do things you don't want me to do. And then we start to get conditioned in a really, really screwy way. Right. And it feels important to me again to say, this is, for me, it's not about bringing in resentment. I do believe that in all of my lives, I've played, you know, I've created this society as much as the next person. And this is the play, this is the game, this is the story of humanity, and the point that we're at now, that we have, been conditioned and socialized in this really screwy way that basically says, follow the path of most resistance, take the way that feels most difficult, go against your body, and you're going to get the biggest prize. And I think that actually initially that started because there were people who wanted to have power over. Very briefly, like if we look, the Roman Catholic Church came in around the 3rd century and were really waging their power in quite violent ways up until the 12th century. They were telling people it's not okay to live by worshipping the earth anymore. Don't trust your body. Don't, like, literally in the pagan temples, there used to be these beautiful dragons painted throughout the temples, and when the Roman Catholic Church came in, it became images of the gallant saints slaying the dragon. Like, it was literally our life force became bad. It became akin to the devil, all of which I never knew until a year ago when I started going to the sacred sites, and I did a little bit of research and started to realize, like, no wonder I don't trust my body. No wonder I've been disgusted at the notion of so much like aliveness or prana or even sexuality. Like, this is what has been ingrained in us. And again, with the witch burnings and the Industrial Revolution, we were taken away from the earth. We were told it's not okay to trust your innate knowings. Don't be intuitive. Don't follow the cycles. Don't be in touch with nature. So this massive disconnection happened. But I believe that if we went back to the 3rd century, we'd see a very different humanity, but that we would need to go back quite a lot further to really contact what it is we're headed back to, which is the real knowing, like the real empowerment, the true sovereignty, the true trust in self. That, like, so much of my journey has been about self-love. It's been about self-forgiveness, coming back to freaking being kind to myself, stopping making myself live in a way that felt like rolling a boulder up a hill, because that's what education felt like, because that's how I learned to get straight A's. It was like, put away my knowing and push all of this dry information that did not light up my body into my head, and then spew it out on the page and, like, perform, and so this connection with the body, with, like I said, a few minutes ago, truly following what feels good. Like, I'm gonna go towards what feels like joy. I'm gonna go towards what lights me up. Funnily enough, living that way is synonymous with health. Funnily enough, going against that means we've got an epidemic of chronic illness. We've got all of these blocks in our bodies. We're against ourselves. We don't trust our life force. But when we start to come back here, and I think it's really important to say that, while if somebody's in a place of feeling quite numb or disconnected, it can feel a bit daunting, the notion of reconnection. Like, this journey is one of deliciousness. I'm not going to say it's all going to be easy, but it's one that's grounded in you coming back to your own compass, which is all about pleasure. It's all about joy. It's all about alignment with what lights me up. So it's very good. And again, like, I think I'll just finish by saying, I think it's almost funny that we might find ourselves baffled that living in a life that isn't really igniting our joy is making us sick. But that's the place that we've come to.
Thanks for that, Ellie. And you've also touched on some really interesting subjects in the sense of, on the wider scale, where is humanity going? And it'd be really good to go into that topic a bit later on. I just wanted to ask you one sort of bit of a drier question, really. But I'm aware there'll be people watching this who won't know much about somatic therapy, and somatic therapy could be very helpful for a number of people going through Kundalini Awakening and other spiritual awakening. So I'm just wondering, on that scale, if you could explain a bit about what somatic therapy is and how it could be relevant to people going through an awakening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm aware that I'm just going to take a breath here because I've spoken so many words and I need to take a moment to drop back into my body. So anybody watching, I invite you to do the same thing. You know, you might be sitting and watching the screen, or you might be walking around, but whatever's true for you, I'm going to invite you to let your awareness to come to a part of your body where you can feel contact being made with the furniture or the ground. And see if you can allow yourself to soften 1% more into that. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm aware that as I tune into my body in this moment, I've got a lot of energy over the right side because I've been using a lot of words and a lot of logic. And I'm wondering if Alan or you, Samir, either of you can support me to answer this question just by reminding me in this moment some of the main challenges that we see or that you've experienced, you know, see people coming into the Kundalini Collective with, you know, things people are needing, things they're wanting, what they want support with. What comes up for you when I ask that question?
Shall I answer that, Alan, or do you want to answer?
You go first.
So the main questions that people ask, and that's a good question, really, are well, first they want, it's not necessarily a question, it's validation. So it's an understanding that what they get, they're not mad, not crazy, and so they don't ask a question. They just need to be in a space where they feel safe enough to open up and hear other people open up and know that their experience isn't weird or strange. And then after that, the next thing is the practicalities, whether it's head pressure, pain, fatigue, tiredness, and then that leads to practical manifestations, loss of income, family members or loved ones thinking that they are have a mental health issue, and more medium term and long term, which is something I know that we've discussed in our Zoom meetups, is do we have a family, children, what about our career, is this it, you know, is our life going to be this kind of cycle of fatigue and energy movements and sometimes bliss and then fatigue again? So there are different questions depending on where they are in the journey, but maybe the most obvious one is how do I live with this in the real world?
Yeah.
No, I totally agree with that, by the way. I would say the same thing.
Yeah. I think it's important. I'll just state that. So what I bring is somatic coaching. It's not therapy. But there are a lot of crossovers. I'm also a mindfulness-based pain and stress management teacher. So there's a lot of crossovers. But yeah, it felt necessary to say that. So as I heard you speak, Samir, it reminded me that so often people, so when I'm working with clients who are going through the Kundalini process, so often what they're needing from me is support to really honor what they know that they're needing. We have the Kundalini arise and suddenly we have all these new needs. The needs might look like new kinds of self-care that we need, slowing down, allowing ourselves to be in new or different kinds of environment, you know, eating differently. And then it can also be really giving them space to tune into their own knowing that it's absolutely okay to let themselves be the being that the Kundalini is making them become. Well, I don't like the word making, but you know, that transformation to really put them in touch with their own sovereignty and their own knowing that it's okay. You know, we can find ourselves so conditioned again by this world that's told us who we should be and what life we have to have in order to be acceptable or safe or happy. And then when those things start to evolve, yeah, often they need the validation and the space holding to really allow themselves to spread their wings and take that space and do that thing that it seems like completely unacceptable to do, like reschedule their life a bit so that there's more time for rest or space or or slowing down or even hearing what it is they need or who they are. And then as I bring my hand to my chest here and say those words, hearing what it is they need and who they are, that's probably the other main core piece that I'm really supporting people to do in my coaching sessions, which is find their way home from lostness, find their way. Sometimes I think in the Kundalini process, or even if we're not in a Kundalini, maybe we're in an awakening process or just in a shift in our life, we know what it is we need and we want. Like we've got this thirst for us, and you just need someone to hold that space and look you in the eye and say, yeah, that's fine, or yeah, I honor you, Godspeed, and sometimes it's, I just know that I'm really distressed where I'm at. I just know that my body used to be fine with that and now it's not. I just know that now I'm in pain when I go to that place. Or now I feel really out of alignment when I'm doing my job, or actually I have this symptom or this pain or this energy in my body and I don't know what it's telling me, but I sense that I need to hear what it's telling me so that I can give it what it needs, so then it can move through and heal. So I think a big piece that I'm doing with my clients is supporting them to remember that innate intelligence, remember that embodied knowing, which again, it's the first language that we speak when we're children. We know what feels good, what feels bad. And then we get conditioned to forget, we get conditioned to think left is right and bad feeling is good feeling. And so supporting my clients to take present, grounded, often very kind, sometimes really fiery, often gentle time with their own being and say, all right, like, what are you telling me? What is the language here? What is being communicated? What is the code? Yeah. And then I think, the last two pieces, literally supporting people to work out how to move the energy through. And sometimes it looks like quite dynamic stuff, but sometimes it looks like you just got to ground. You just got to get yourself grounded enough so the energy can do what it needs to do, and that'll feel stable enough in your body. And then synonymous with that is nervous system regulation. Like the Kundalini. And I'm aware in this moment, again, I've been using a lot of words, so I need to let my body move and communicate in a way maybe with a bit less words. So what does this movement mean? Finding their own ways and using the tried and tested tools and ways to support the body to feel more like this, to come back to playfulness, to come back to safety, to come back to calm. Often there's a lot of dormant anxiety or stress or trauma in the body, which is activated when Kundalini happens. There can be a lot of panic because there's so much shift happening in our lives. How do we come back to center? How do we refine that peace? How do we find the ground? And it's my experience that no matter how upside down or beautiful or crazy or uncertain or frightening life can feel in any moment for whatever reason, when we learn how to work from the bottom up, from the body first, when we learn how to get to know our nervous system and what it's really saying and how to soothe it and come back to regulation, come back to calm, anything is possible. We can always refine peace, we can refine joy, and possibly most significantly, we can get back in touch with our own inner knowing. And that is what's so needed at this time. And that's not just for our own joy, not just for our own healing and our own processes, but for the shift that's happening in society. Like this compass, this is what we've lost touch with. And all of the wars and all of the catastrophic events, the man-made or woman-made catastrophic events on the planet that are happening right now have been instigated by people who are out of touch with their own bodies. They are out of touch with their own hearts. They are not regulated. And that's why it's so important to come back here, because the body speaks only with love and only with our true truth and only in alignment with the rest of the natural world. And that's why it's so wise and needed and precious at this time.
Thanks, Ellie. That's lovely and profound at the same time. You're talking about a shift happening, and we talked about the bigger picture. So maybe it'd be great to talk about your thoughts about this shift, how that ties into your own experiences on the Kundalini Awakening path, and through others that you've met. What do you feel is happening? And maybe you can bring in things like somatic work and other things. Where is this going to, and what's happening collectively?
Yeah, that's such a juicy question, but I want to throw it right back at you first, Samir. What do you think about that? I always love hearing you talk on that topic so much. It's deeply inspiring. So I'm curious if I haven't put you on the spot too much.
You have put on the spot.
or you, Alan.
You have put me on the spot, but I will try and answer. I think we're going through the final part of a cycle, and the cycle is a journey of humanity from a collective consciousness to one where we're going to be collective again, but also individual in a collective consciousness. And so the fall from grace was learning how to be individual, which involves pain, and pain is, and suffering was an evolutionary technique for us to learn how to evolve into the I, an individual. And then the spiritual awakening part of it is us taking that individualness that we've learned and bringing it into a new collective. So if there were 7 chakras, I think there's an 8th opening up, a global planetary shift. And what we're seeing, and I discuss it with Alan quite often, is the generation that we are and the generation after us and after them have taken all the ancestral trauma, and we're finally churning through it because society has framed itself in such a way that we are, even if we're doing it subconsciously, dealing with repressed trauma. And so going back to the question, the trauma and all these techniques that are coming back to us are coming back to us for a reason, because there are ways for us to deal with trauma so that we can individually and collectively awaken. And what's going on in the world is collective trauma being brought out. Alan's got a good analogy to do with the pus and the spot. And while some people will view this as an apocalyptic scenario, my awakening journey, a very non-dual awakening journey, is suggesting that if you take the different apocalyptic scenarios and all of the end of world theories, they're dualistic in nature. But actually, if you bring them together, there's actually, let's call it a union of love coming. And what we think is apocalyptic will happen in our minds and our fears, and that's the trauma. That's the collective trauma. It's the loss of everything. That's the ultimate trauma that all human beings carry. It's this loneliness and loss of everything that we believe to be true. And that's the final fear that we'll all face together. And we'll get through it because the spiritual awakening collectiveness that's coming to many of us is helping us hold space for others. And trauma is the key. I mean, the more that I dig into this through the collective and everything else, trauma work is the key, because we're doing it subconsciously. But if we begin to do it consciously with these techniques, like what you're doing, somatic work, and then the work with hallucinogens, which is all shamanic, and meditation and other ways to understand the brain, then we're actually doing conscious trauma work. And that is going to induce spiritual awakening, oneness, union. That takes away dualistic thinking, and that, you know, people who are out their bodies will come in their bodies. So what was chaotic to me 17 years ago is I begin to see a pattern that something's going on bigger than us, bringing us all together. And I said to Alan today, it's the earth. The earth plays music, and we just move to its musical beats, and it's placing us in positions so that one day when there's these nightmare scenarios, people will hold space for others, and they've gone through their trauma work, and they will help others awaken. But that's a theory and my opinion. but I'm beginning to be very solid about it. I wasn't sure. And the more that I go through the journey, the more that I think, well, there's definitely something happening and it's got a pattern and it's not negative. But it does involve a lot of challenging processes and it is collective. We tend to look at this as an individual process, but there's definitely a collective shift happening. So yeah, so what you're bringing to the table with your somatic work and what you're doing is one of those healing modalities that I think is going to help people move through. They're not, you know, these things weren't going on before and we need these new techniques. Yeah, that's me throwing in my 2 cents.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's it's interesting that you've circled back round with the word trauma there. Like for myself, when I started to realize that, and trauma is just a word, right? And as I said, my experience, my knowing about trauma is that what it is, it's energy trapped in the body. And I remember when I started to realize that I was in this clinic where that it was going to help me to like free my being and release all of this stuff that had been holding me back, and that it was like time capsules in my body, because that is what trauma is like. You know, the way that we heal it, the way that we can shake it out and discharge it is by, and it can be playful, it can be dancing, it can be anything which helps us to, in a felt sense, energetic frequency way or an emotional way, go back to the experience that created the trauma in our body in the first place. And I just found it magical. I remember one of my therapists saying to me, he said, okay, so you're in a trauma clinic, the worst has happened. And I was thinking, I feel like I've won the lottery. It was one of the hardest things I've done, but so beautiful. This work with the body, yeah, it's individual and it's utterly collective. You know, I've touched on the timeline from 300 AD onwards. Of course, there was a whole lot of stuff that went on before then. And also there's an incredibly potent period over the past 200 years when we've had, you know, 2 very memorable wars, to name other things that have happened. And for me, it's present in my being, like this awful, tragic, beautiful, magical story where my family line, my ancestors and everybody else's too, were those who were just a few steps behind us, those who were basically carrying the baby or carrying the baton that last couple of 100 years before it would be time when we arrived here, which of course is a time that has been prophesied for millennia by almost every indigenous community on the planet, that this is when the change would come. This is when we would make I always see it like a huge ship, the ship of the story of humanity changing course from fear back to love, from fragmentation back to wholeness or oneness. And yeah, like our ancestors, the past handful of family generations in these wars and still storing all this trauma in their bodies, you know, keep calm and carry on, stiff upper lip. My lineage is largely British and German, so there's a lot of that, keeping it all buttoned up and everything locked down. And even though there's a part of me in my human mind which can resent that, because she blames my family for conditioning me to hold it all in and be a good little girl for as many years as I did do that, actually, like, goodness me, thankful for them for doing their part in it, playing their role in this big human earthbound play on earth level of, yeah, they did keep calm and carry on as far as they were able. They didn't shake, you know, they took the rap of getting labeled with shell shock, the ones who did shake and not they were some of the first who really registered with something that we could call trauma, and humanity in the West at least didn't have the knowledge then, didn't have the knowing, didn't have the healing techniques, wasn't quite ready yet. Bless my immediate ancestors who did that, who did keep going. My grandmother, she came over from Germany, having been a German in the war, and she met my granddad, and she came over here and she made a life here, and they had my dad, and her first husband was a Nazi, and she came over here and she buttoned it all in, and she buttoned up, and she was another woman in my lineage who lived unable to express herself as she would have wanted. And she, as the beautiful, perfectly imperfect woman she was, gave her love to me and nourished me. And here I am now at this point, this pinnacle point, as I said, in human history, when we're waking up to so much, including the body, including trauma, including what's needed to happen, not just in a mental and societal and structural level on the outside, but here, like this is where it happens. And I know this is why I came in as this brand of being in this body at this time, and why so many of us have come in at this time, thirsty for truth, thirsty for aliveness. We've had enough of the veneers being on society, of everybody like moving the figures around in parliament, and the outdated social structures, and pretending that we really think that that's what's going to change the world. No, there's this, oh God, there's this ocean of aliveness that has been in all of our beings for all of these generations, and it's been like banging on the ceiling of our visceral meat suits saying, oh my God, you've got to let me out. And they didn't let it out because it wasn't quite time yet. Like, you just had to wait. And now is the time. And that's why there's so many more of us having Kundalini awakenings now. That's why trauma is the buzzword of the century, and embodiment of the moment, and so is embodiment. That is why, because the body keeps the score, because the body cannot lie, and the shackles are coming off. And really, we don't have a conscious choice about this. It's going to happen for you in this lifetime, or it's not. And it's happening for oceans more than ever did before in memorable human history. And it's scary, and it's messy, and it's freaking amazing. This is the time that we've been waiting for, and we are the ones that we've been waiting for. You can trust this. It might be painful, it might be scary at times, like as Sada Simone says, honey, being a human being is painful, but you got to stay in the body, like this is where the gold is, and this is how you connect to your compass, and it will guide us home.
Thanks, Ellie. That's a great message. I want to just maybe suggest that, because people who come to this podcast may not know about the model of trauma that we're talking about, how trauma can be stored in the body and the energetic map, maybe just let us know succinctly, how do you view the kind of model of trauma that we're talking about, and how does it relate to the body?
Yeah, okay. So this model, of course, has been known by Indigenous communities for a very, very, very long time, but it's really burst onto the scene in the West with the work of a number of teachers, but particularly Peter Levine. So he talks about in his book, Waking the Tiger, that he was with a client in a session. I think perhaps he was a psychotherapist at that point. I'm not quite sure. And she was describing a traumatic event, and he suddenly had the knowing to say to her, run, let your legs make the movement of running. And she did. And she had this huge release. And he realized intuitively at that point that the body had to be brought into the healing process, that something was happening which wasn't just about the mind. And so let me just find as simple a words as possible to say as I understand it. So I think I might need to ask you a question, Samir. So what is it that I've not said? So I know that before I said that what's happening when the body is traumatized is that there was an event, and we may remember it or we may not, in which a there will have been stress, there will have anxiety, something difficult happening. The body, the being believed that they were under threat. Huge amounts of fight, flight energy arose. They may have been aware of it, they may have not. But in either case, there will have been a part of them that wanted to express that energy by fighting, by yelling at the person, by defending themselves, by running away, using that energy. And for whatever reason, they didn't. Maybe they felt like it wasn't appropriate. Maybe they literally felt trapped, or maybe their body just immediately went into a kind of frozen state. In any case, that huge, and I've heard it described as volcanic or Jurassic energy of fight, flight, and the body gets frozen and put down and put away somewhere. And then the nervous system, because it's always trying to heal, it wants to discharge that energy. And maybe this isn't what I said before, it gets caught in a kind of loop. And that's why we find ourselves in situations where maybe our anxiety gets triggered almost for no reason, or our anger does, or we might have panic attacks. We think we're fine. All of this is so buried beneath the surface. We're even having thought processes that we can't recognize, like something's here that's making me feel unsafe, and we're completely unaware of it. And all of a sudden, the nervous system goes into panic and we can't breathe, or whatever it is. For some, and this is how it was for me, my nervous system wouldn't go into something that I could recognize as panic. It would go straight to freeze. So I was in a kind of shutdown. I was in a semi-frozen state. This can manifest in the body in all kinds of ways. It might be fatigue, it might be migraines, it might be toothache, all kinds of ways that the body finds ways to shelve this fight, flight, these impulses, to say no, to say that's not okay, to run away. So what's left, Samir? What are you still wanting to know?
Maybe it's okay. You know what? You have said everything. Maybe I'm going to come back to you with an idea and let me know what you think. And maybe you've already said this. So in the yogic model, we have an energy system. We have, the Ida, Sushumna, Pingala, we have these lines. Prana flows up. And in the tantric books, they say that Kundalini rises through and unblocks the channels. In fact, what really happens is you balance, before the Kundalini rises, you do yoga and you balance your pranic energies left and right. So theoretically, what they say is a spontaneous movement happens when the blocks are cleared. They call it kriyas, a spontaneous kriya. It could be a mudra, it could be a yogic posture, but they don't talk about trauma, obviously, this is 5,000 years ago. But they're saying that there's a block, you might have some kind of attachment to something. And so the prana will release that block with some kind of movement. That's one way of looking at it. So I just wondered, do you see that mapped upon what you're talking about? That the energy matrix is the body, and the body's where it stores whatever memory, that's where the block is in the energy system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where it comes down to, often I use the phrase follow what feels good. And some people can get quite confused by that, because they'll be like, yeah, but this journey is messy and it's painful, and we're talking about what feels just even a little better in the body, what feels the next step that feels more like expansion than contraction. So the reason I've said that is because on the one hand, when we look at healing trauma, we might be talking about, being in a session with a coach or a therapist, deliberately recalling events and helping the body to get back into that emotional or energetic state. And then the body remembers how it wants to shake it out or run its legs. Or for me, I made a lot of holes in a lot of walls because I realized that there was so much energy stuck in my legs and I had to get it moving. And so there's that piece of it where we might, find ourselves, doing it within the context of a therapeutic environment. And then there's also the much bigger picture where actually our bodies are so wise. And we see this, not everybody's going to a coach or a therapist to do this. They might be going to 5 rhythms classes. They might unknowingly be doing ecstatic dance or in clubs. They might be doing it at breathwork sessions. They might be doing it when they allow themselves to go and walk in the woods and get really sweaty and find themselves crying or like raging at a tree and they don't even know why. Or You know, it might be happening when they finally get the gumption to put up a boundary with somebody. You know, these kinds of like that's, you know, healthy aggression, finally finding it in themselves to say no, and that mobilizes the energy in their body in a new way. You know, these blocks in our bodies can be opened up and flowed with and revealed and healed in so many ways. And a really key part of this, and I think this is true equally for the Kundalini awakening process, no matter what bit of it we're looking at, it's about coming back here and being like, I trust that if I follow what feels right in my body, then the energy is going to flow. Then the next step of healing is going to come. You know, I don't know how it's been for you guys. For me, this process at times has looked, like I said, being in sessions, being in group support groups, whatever it is, being at conscious dance. Sometimes it's looked like, you know, allowing myself to make the most bizarre noises in my bedroom because my body just has to let it out. Or I had years when I was just stomping up hills and stomping up hills and stomping up hills. And then eventually the energy channels started to open in my legs, you know, like, and I just knew that I had to do it because it made me feel a little bit better. It just made me feel a little bit better. Yeah, what's here for you guys now that I've said that? Oh, Samir, you're muted.
Sorry, what? So remind me what the question was back to us.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, you were asking me about trauma, and then you were asking me, yeah, I don't know.
Oh, I think the question I asked you was mapping the energy. So there's a Kundalini energy map, and it works through the blocks, the energy blocks, and I think it maps onto what you're saying, which is we store trauma in our bodies, and there are techniques that you can do to release the trauma from your body, the memory or the pain or the emotion. And in some ways, so to answer your question, I think quite early on in my journey, I realized that I think block prana is emotional distress. So that's how I looked at it. So because in the 21st century, I have an emotional life, I don't have a yogic life, I could look at my energy field as a series of emotional blocks and memories. And that every time my spontaneous movement was happening, and it still happens in my left side on the shoulder, there's a memory or some kind of trauma. And it doesn't work in a linear fashion. So it doesn't go like bottom up. It can go up, down, left, right, in, out. So it's not a linear, but it's working through all the blocks are associated with each other. Memories don't have a time and a space necessarily. They all happen at once in some ways. Right. So to answer your question, I think the modern Kundalini awakening phenomenon, we need to create a new map and just map on the psychological and emotional trauma onto the yogic map. And maybe it's going to be slightly different, but I think there's something new is happening. And I think it involves the old stuff of the past, but the new experiences we have, which is most centered on the heart, emotion, love, kindness, compassion, but fear, hate, all these things. And what would be great is in the next 10, 15 years, or even 5 years, we can come up with a kind of new model for the awakening path that seems to be happening to many hundreds of thousands of people now.
Right.
Can I think the way I would comment is that slightly different but connected. Traditionally in the West, you have therapy, psychotherapy, which and therapy has its place, but I think that the Kundalini, the energetic release, and I think the body work you're doing has another very valuable contribution, in the sense, this is a metaphor I've used a number of times in the past. I had, like everyone, well, most people, I had childhood trauma, and if you talk going back years, I did only had some counselling, but that helped. Imagine someone running around a running track, then every few yards they hit something and go, ouch. Well, having therapy can help you identify why you're going ouch. Well, there's hurdles all the way around the track. So by psychotherapy, you can identify the hurdles. But that does not necessarily help you to jump them. And something that happened to me a year after my Kundalini Awakening, I realized there was a big change in the sense I hadn't realized I had retained some emotional anger towards my mother, which none of her fault. But intellectually, I process it, but I hadn't emotionally. And the Kundalini helped me to do that. Well, in a way, she did it for me. So I jumped that hurdle. And I think by doing body work, there's opportunities to jump over, help us not just to identify the blocks, but to actually process them and jump over them.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Would you say that trauma work is the same as shadow work?
There's definitely crossover, but I don't think they're necessarily the same. I mean, if I think about my own shadow work, like, it's certainly been traumatic at times because, you know, the fear of the parts of me that I think that aren't acceptable is rooted in the fear of the trauma of being stopped from being part of tribe, you know, and that's really deep and scary and horrid. And there's certainly trauma work to be done in the healing of the relationship with my shadow, because I'll work with the traumatic events where I felt like I was, you know, wronged, or bits of me were made bad, and how awful that was. But I don't think it's the same thing. Why do you ask?
I love how you put the questions back to me. So I'm colored by my own journey. So this is just my opinion. So I think so for me, trauma work and shadow work are probably the same. And the reason that is because what I see as shadow is the sides of myself that I've either repressed or hidden from. And for me, that's the trauma. I've never really, pre-Kundalini, I was dealing with my trauma, but very subconsciously, like going to a dance and dancing it out, but not necessarily consciously. And the Kundalini showed me that techniques and ways to reveal the trauma, and the trauma was shadow stuff that I was running away from. So I might see it as semantic, although I haven't done a deep dive into this enough to know whether there's a difference, or what. I mean, you're saying there is a difference, and I see Adam shaking his head. So it's just a thought. But I think what Kundalini does, it uncovers. You have to face your fears with Kundalini. Whatever fears you hold on to, you will face it. And for me, that is trauma. Now, maybe it's not. I don't know. But that's how I see it. So if I have a fear, it's linked to a memory and something repressed. And it can be past life, but I think Kundalini allows you to experience it as present life stuff. And then you can face it in real life and you can release it. Sometimes it can be done somatically. And in my life, a lot of stuff was done somatically through spontaneous movement, but a lot of it, maybe most of it, was done through real life, going back to the same people that I thought hurt me, let's say, and working through stuff with them, with the Kundalini really guiding me. And so that was shadow stuff. It was also trauma, but it was also emotional, and it was also unblocking. So I tend to kind of put it all together. But again, that's my experience.
Mm.
I just say, I think they're both similar in the sense they're under the surface, but they're not necessarily quite the same. That would be my own personal view.
I think as I'm hearing you speak, I mean, there's resonance for me in everything that both of you say. And at the same time, the bit that really jumped out for me was when I heard you say, well, this is semantics, because there is a real felt sense monkey in me who just is here, and she really wants to live. She really wants to live all of the time in that place that I was talking about before, where all the truth is that's under the surface, and she's not interested in words at all. She's like, why does it matter? Just see what it feels like and go with that. But words are useful at times.
But they have their limits.
They do.
Yeah.
No, I think we can wrap up soon, but I just want to say that I'm reading a book at the moment by Steve Taylor called Extraordinary Awakenings, and it's When Trauma Leads to Transformation. And basically, and I haven't read the whole book yet, but it's taking anything from incarceration to war to the death of a loved one. And it's giving real life examples of people who've experienced a non-dual, not necessarily Kundalini, but definitely non-dual spiritual awakening. So an expansive awareness, the grief or the suffering of the trauma leads to some kind of healing and then a spontaneous non-dual experience. So I just linking into what you're saying, it sounds like, with this conversation, it sounds like a lot of people are having subconscious drives to heal their trauma, and they might be doing it in different ways. They don't know what's going on. They don't realize that they're healing their trauma, but they have some kind of trauma or some kind of shadow or trauma. Let's say trauma for now. And they're led through either shaking in the forest or running or just going to meditation to calm themselves down, and going to a yoga class, or maybe doing a hallucinogen, and suddenly they have a spiritual awakening because whatever trauma that they have been carrying, it kind of releases it. So it does feel like there's a growth in the unconscious kind of collective awakening using techniques that are given to us in society that 150 years ago they were banned or they were secret. So I think something is going on, and it's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's super exciting. I think it's the eruption that we've been waiting for. And it's, like I said before, it can be scary and messy and it's uncertain, but it's made of love, and it is orientating us back to love. We've had like this, wax bottle stop in the top of our experience for such a long time. And we had to let all of the stuff out in order to clear that, in order to get down back to the bare bones of why it is that we're here in these bodies, why we've come to have this human experience. And it's about connection, it's about love, it is about beauty, it's about truth, it's about creating things together. And again, I have absolute faith that we can trust this. And I think if I would leave people with anything, I would say, trust yourself and trust your body and trust what you feel. And if you don't know what to do, just be in this moment and just do the next right fit thing that feels guided by love. Just do the next right thing that feels even a little better in your body. And if it feels like a risk to you to do something that maybe other people might not have done, or that might be frowned on, or it looks a little bit too much like you're taking care of yourself very well, I invite you to take that risk. Do it, do something different. This is how we are remaking our world.
That makes a lot of sense. So just if you imagine going inside and looking for signposts, and if you see as like a road signpost pointing to joy or love, then they're good ones to follow.
Right, exactly, Alan. That's so beautiful. And I just like to, is it okay if I just drop in, Samir, the booklet that I mentioned to you before? Yeah, I was saying to these guys just before we pressed record that doing this podcast today has finally got me to finish a Kundalini Support guide and ebook. So you guys can download that for free from my website. Just go to elliepaskell.com/Kundalini and you will find it. Right there.
And we'll put your details in the notes underneath the playback screen. And also, maybe you should mention about your work, and if people want to do one-to-one sessions with you, how they can contact you and what you do.
Yeah, great. So what I'll say about that is, there's oodles and oceans that I could say about what I do, but I think that if you've watched this and you've got a bit of a spidey sense, a bit of a whisker prickle, wondering about maybe there's something that we could do together that would serve you, you're so welcome to schedule a chat with me. We can just have a chat on the phone. You can get more of a feel for what it's like to be with me one-to-one. You can ask any questions you've got. And to schedule that in, simply go to elliepaskell.com/connect. And you can just send me a message right from there. And finally, I'll say that if you would like to join me for a group session, I do once a month, I do live self-love Sunday sessions. So this is all about this root piece of self-kindness that I discovered when I was like a small soft fetus in the trauma clinic, thinking, why have I been so mean to myself my whole life? It hasn't done any good. And yeah, let's make a space where you get to learn to be kind to yourself and heal your body and revolutionize your life in the process. So that's what these Sunday sessions are. Yeah, once a month. They're free to attend. You just need to sign up. Go to elliepaskell.com/self-love. And you're so welcome. I would, love to see you there.
Well, thanks a lot, Ellie. And I forgot to ask, and we'll do it for next time, about your link to sacred sites, because both Alan and myself also love visiting these sites. So next time we do a podcast, we will talk about that. Yeah. So thanks, everyone. And I should mention that, because some people come to our podcasts without knowing that we have a website, we have a community called Kundalini Collective, and that's www.kundalinicollective.org. And once a month, the last Friday of every month, we do free Zoom sessions where we have a support group with people who have Kundalini questions or need support. And the information's on the website, and you can join and you can find out more information about the Kundalini process and find out people who can support you, like Ellie and others, on the support page. Okay, so thanks, Ellie. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, guys. It's been fun. Yeah.
All right. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you on the Zoom sessions.